The first holidays of the year have ended here in Israel, and we could say that the war has also ended. Well, what's happening right now is not the end of the conflict. It's a tense pause, an armed pause, a pause in which Iran agreed to hold back for 2 weeks, but Hezbollah kept firing. Israel kept striking in Lebanon, and everyone already understands that a signed paper doesn't always mean the missiles will stop falling. Greetings, I'm Ari. Today, April 9th, the situation is quite clear, but at the same time, quite delicate. There is a temporary ceasefire with Iran, mediated by Pakistan, with talks scheduled in Islamabad to try to build something more lasting. But Israel made it clear from the very beginning that this pause did not automatically close the Lebanon front. And that difference, which may sound technical, is actually the key to everything we're seeing right now. Why do I say this is key? Well, because for Iran, Hezbollah is not a separate issue. For Tehran, the Lebanese front is part of the same regional axis. It's ultimately one of its proxies. That's why the Iranian president came out to say that the Israeli attacks in Lebanon violated the initial agreement and that if they continue, the negotiations would lose their meaning. On the other side, the United States and Israel. They argued that the ceasefire was with Iran and not with Hezbollah, and that northern Israel remains an active front as long as there is a real threat from the other side of the border. And this is where the latest Israeli strikes in Lebanon come in, which were anything but symbolic. Yesterday, the Israeli Air Force launched the largest wave of attacks in this phase of the campaign against Hezbollah. According to the military, 50 aircraft took part. Fighter jets dropped about 160 bombs and attacked around 100 targets in just 10 minutes. The targets, according to the Israeli version, were command centers, military infrastructure, and Hezbollah operational nodes in Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and southern Lebanon. Israel says that this strike was aimed at intelligence headquarters, attack planning centers, firepower infrastructure, naval assets, and also at units such as the Radwan Force and the so-called Unit 127. In other words, it was not a warning attack. It was a demonstration of capability, of reach, and a message. The message is quite clear and direct. Even if there is a pause with Iran, Israel does not intend to allow Hezbollah to use that pause to catch its breath, rearm, and re-establish a deterrence equation in the north. And in all of this, when the war enters this phase, the maps and the statements may sound surgical, but cities do not experience war as a theory. They live it among smoke, ruins, ambulances, and fear. While many thought that after this wave there could be a relative calm, today we saw that this is not the case. Hezbollah kept firing. According to the CFDI, about 70 rockets were launched today from Lebanon toward northern Israel. There were alerts in several areas in the north, including Naria, which is very close to the border, and areas of Galilee. Although in several of those cases, the projectiles landed in open areas and no immediate injuries were reported. Right before recording this video, Haifa was also attacked up in the north. But here the important thing is not just the specific damage. The important thing is that the front remains open, remains alive, remains active. In fact, the same Israeli reports indicated today that since March 2nd, Hezbollah has fired about 3,000 munitions from southern Lebanon toward Israel. And at the same time, Israel reported that in an attack in Beirut, Ali Yusuf Arshi was killed, identified as the nephew and personal secretary of Naim Qassem, the current leader of Hezbollah. In other words, while some are talking about a truce on the ground, two things are still happening at the same time: launches from Lebanon toward Israel and targeted killings of figures linked to the leadership of Hezbollah. And this then shows us that this war isn't over. This is an ongoing war. All right, and another important element comes into play here. Netanyahu announced that Israel will begin direct talks with Lebanon as soon as possible. According to reports in Israeli media, the focus of these talks would be the disarmament of Hezbollah and the possibility of moving toward more stable relations between the two countries. But well, this needs to be looked at closely and paid a lot of attention to. At the same time, Israeli sources clearly said that there is no ceasefire today. But Israeli forces will remain on the ground to respond to any threat. That is diplomacy, yes, but with a finger still on the trigger. On the Lebanese side, what is being proposed is not exactly peace. Pay attention. At the time, Israelis clearly said, watch this very closely, with a magnifying glass and attention. Magnifying glass and attention. They said. Reuters today quoted a high-ranking Lebanese official saying that Beirut has been pushing for a temporary ceasefire for the past 24 hours that would allow for broader talks with Israel.
Before I dive in, I want to share with you the story of this vial, which amazed me, and I think you should know about too. This vial holds an unbelievable story that was unheard until now. Inside is earth from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, rescued by archaeologists after thousands of years of history were dumped as rubble. It is our opportunity to prevent history from disappearing. Start the new year with a personal connection to Jerusalem. Click the link in bio or scan the code to enjoy a special offer.
Formula similar to the fragile truce mediated by Pakistan between the United States and Iran. At the same time, several European countries pushed today for the truce to also be extended to Lebanon, saying that if this doesn't happen, the whole region could become even more destabilized. And here is another key point that needs to be said. It needs to be explained clearly enough. Israel seems to be trying to do two things at the same time. First, strike hard before diplomatic pressure limits it. And second, to reach the negotiating table with a much tougher, much more advantageous position, and with Hezbollah further weakened. Even the outlet Israel Ion reported today that in Jerusalem they are considering returning to the earlier November 24 framework for Lebanon, but only after carrying out much of it. In other words, if it stops, it would be after having left a very clear mark. This explains why yesterday's strike was so broad, so forceful. It wasn't just a military punishment, it was also a positioning move ahead of diplomacy. Because if tomorrow Israel enters into talks about Lebanon, it wants to do so from a very simple premise. Hezbollah must truly be disarmed, not just in statements, not in promises, not in ambiguous formulas. And honestly, seeing everything that has happened since October and looking at the details, rockets fired since March, it's hard to believe that Israel will accept anything less than that. All right, now let's move on to the ceasefire with Iran, because there we also need to see how everything is unfolding. Netanyahu said that this 2-week truce is not the end of the war. It's not the end of the campaign, not the end of the war, but a milestone on the way to Israel's objectives. He also said that Israel is ready to resume fighting at any moment and that their finger is still on the trigger. And he added something even more important, that Iran's enriched uranium will have to be removed from the equation, either through an agreement or by resuming the fighting. In other words, the pause exists, but the strategic condition that caused the war has not been resolved. Now, if you look at the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, you understand even better how fragile this situation is. Because today, even with a truce, the confusion continued. Israeli media reported that the maritime passage remained practically closed or operating well below normal. Meanwhile, Iran insisted that ships had to coordinate with its authorities, that is, with the Iranian authorities, and follow routes under Iranian control. In other words, the truce has not yet restored real regional normality. We are not seeing a post-war period. We are seeing a tense, conditional armistice and full of potential traps. So, what could happen with this ceasefire? Well, my very personal take, looking at everything reported by Israeli media today and international media, is that there are 3 possible scenarios. The first is that the truce holds long enough to produce a minimal framework, clear limitations on the nuclear program, real reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and some understanding regarding the Lebanese front. The second is that the truce holds formally, but it gradually weakens with peripheral clashes, proxy attacks, and mutual recriminations. The third, which still feels very real and very much under the surface to me, is that all this can break down quickly. If Iran doesn't give in on the nuclear issue, if Hezbollah keeps firing, or if Israel concludes that the pause is only giving its enemies breathing room. And this last point, well, it's an inference, but it's pretty much in line with what so many media outlets are publishing today, as well as with official statements. And to understand the magnitude of what this war against Iran has been so far, I want to pause for a moment. On the hard data from the updated tally of what these 40 days of war involving the United States and Israel against Iran have left behind. Based on the update, as of today, 19,800 targets have been attacked in Iran. There were 60 targeted killings, 25 high-ranking officials eliminated, 1,937 Iranian casualties. On the Israeli side, 96,428 sirens sounded. There were 1,435 launches from Iran, more than 4,400 launches from Lebanon, 6,305 civilians evacuated, 42 dead, and 7,183 injured. And at the regional level, the chart shows 14 U.S. bases attacked, 1,241 missiles launched, 3,956 drones launched from Iran, and 13 U.S. soldiers killed. Well, when you hear all these figures, all these numbers in a row, you understand something very simple. This was not just another round. It wasn't another isolated incident between Israel and Iran. It was a large-scale regional war. Military, civil, economic, and strategic impact on several countries in the region at the same time. And Ynet, the Israeli media outlet, summed it up today with another significant figure. The ceasefire came after these 40 days of fighting, with 42 dead on the Israeli side. According to this same count, 22 died from direct hits by missiles and rockets. 12 soldiers and 1 civilian died in combat against Hezbollah, and another 7 people died in accidents or in war-related emergencies. It's hard to say it and to see this whole picture. Behind every number, there's a broken home, a destroyed family, a story that won't come back, and this is on both sides. And if you want to sum up the Israeli narrative about the achievements of this war, today Netanyahu presented it quite clearly. He said that Israel severely hit Iranian missile production, the nuclear infrastructure,
fábricas de centrifugal,
centrifuges, military infrastructure, financial networks of the Iranian security apparatus, as well as scientists and high-ranking officials. That is what Israel is putting on the table today as a military result. Now, it's a different matter whether these strikes can be turned into a stable strategic settlement. And that's where the doubts begin. Because the reality is that a military victory doesn't always equal a political solution. Israel may have degraded capabilities, may have forced Iran to come to the table in a weakened position, may have left Hezbollah in a more difficult position. But the underlying problem remains the same. If there is no mechanism to prevent the reconstruction of the Iranian nuclear program and the rearmament of Hezbollah, and the gradual return of the threat to the north, then the truce may end up being just a pause between 2 stages of the same war. And several analyses published today in Israeli media are going precisely in that direction. The fighting stopped, but the underlying objectives are still not completely resolved. Here in Israel, that is felt in a very particular way, because even though today there is talk of a truce with Iran, the feeling is not one of a celebrated victory and a settled matter. The feeling is more one of vigilance, of people watching the news out of the corner of their eye, and families taking shelter who know that a pause can last, yes, of course, but it can also be broken in a matter of hours. If a single decision changes in Tehran, in Beirut, in Jerusalem, or in Washington. There is also something that should be said honestly. This war has not caused pain on only one side. In Israel, people have gone through very tough weeks. Personally, we have gone through some very, very complicated days. Even in the middle of what was the celebration known as the Pesach holiday, with sirens, many deaths, evacuees, and enormous pressure on daily life. But at the same time, Lebanese civilians are also paying a very high price under bombardment. And precisely because of that, any serious analysis has to hold 2 things at the same time. Israel's right to defend its population, and the painful reality that when war expands, ordinary people, people like us, like you who are watching me, end up caught in the middle of a war. None of us were asked for our opinion. All right, and going back to the big picture, my conclusion today, April 9th, is this. The ceasefire with Iran exists, but it is very fragile. The war with Hezbollah is not over, And what Israel is trying to do is use this window to turn military pressure into diplomatic advantage. The problem is that this transition is still not guaranteed. Because Iran insists on linking Lebanon to the truce, Hezbollah keeps firing, Europe is pushing for an extension of the ceasefire, the United States wants the talks to work, and at the same time Israel is not willing to give the country's north a false sense of calm that lasts a week and then explodes again. And if tomorrow these talks about Lebanon really move forward, the central question will not be whether or not there is a temporary pause. The real question will be whether anyone can guarantee that Hezbollah will truly not rebuild its military infrastructure next to the border. Because if this guarantee doesn't exist, then Israel will continue to reserve the right to act, and the North will keep living under the shadow of another escalation. So in summary, today we're not seeing the end of a war, but rather the attempt to reshape what comes next. The war with Iran has paused for negotiations. The Lebanese front is still active, and the immediate future will depend on whether Islamabad produces real commitments or simply buys time. The question isn't just what will happen tomorrow. The question is whether this truce will be the beginning of a way out or just the uncomfortable silence before another, even harsher round. Thank you for joining me. Let me know what you think in the comments, your interpretation of this whole truce, and whether you really believe it can hold. Sending you greetings here from Israel. Don't leave without leaving a like and sharing this video. See you.